Welcome back to Hardball. Former Vice President Dick Cheney continues to defend his record and to criticize the Obama administration. But some of his statements just don't pass the truth test. Let's turn to two reporters who have been fact-checking the former vice president's public statements. Jonathan Landay is national security correspondent for the McClatchy newspapers, and Warren Strobel is their foreign affairs correspondent. Let's move on to a couple of thoughts. Here's the former vice president trying to blame former CIA Director George Tenet for making a connection between Saddam Hussein and 9/11. Let's listen.
Prime source of information on the relationship between Iraq and al-Qaeda was George Tenet, who was the director of the Central Intelligence Agency, and who testified, if you go back and check the record, in the fall of '02 before the Senate Intelligence Committee in open session, that there was a relationship. Didn't say collaborative relationship or operational relationship, which are code words sometimes that get wrapped up in this debate, but that there was a relationship between al-Qaeda and Iraq that stretched back 10 years.
But Dick Cheney pushed the Saddam 9/11 link two different times on Meet the Press back in 2001 and 2002 during the run-up to war. And he was very specific back then in saying that Saddam had some connection to 9/11 because of a meeting that occurred between representatives of Saddam Hussein and the killers of 9/11, particularly Mohammed Atta. Here he is nailing it, saying we got to go after Saddam Hussein because he had something to do with attacking us on 9/11. Much more particular than anything he just alluded to in statements previously made by George Tenet. Here he is, the vice president, making the case for war as I remember it, and you too remember it.
It's been pretty well confirmed that he did go to Prague and he did meet with a senior official of the Iraqi intelligence service. We have reporting that places him in Prague with a senior Iraqi intelligence official a few months before the attack on the World Trade Center.
Jonathan, that's what really got to me during this whole war, the way that he was able to say we had to go to war with a guy, and it was all a country western music too back then. We got to get even. Remember how you felt? I remember the whole drum beat of the damn thing. We got to go to war with Iraq because they somehow attacked us on 9/11. Cheney was relentless on this subject, and now he's falling back to some general commentary by George Tenet. You first, Jonathan, and then Warren on this topic about how he's trying to tie this to Tenet.
Well, he's referring to something that George Tenet actually writes on in his own book. It's a hearing that took place on October 17th, 2002, in which George Tenet talked about how as far as the CIA was concerned, the former vice president is mischaracterizing what George Tenet said. He said that there were sporadic contacts between al-Qaeda and Iraqi representatives over a period of a decade. He used the word relationship in saying the following, and I'm not going to get it exactly right, but he said, as far as the CIA was concerned, the relationship was probably one between rivals who were looking at how they could exploit one another. That's how he used the word relationship.
And Warren, he used that now, he's using that now as his alibi for his claim that got us into the war, that somehow we were getting even with Saddam Hussein for having played a role in attacking us and killing 3,000 Americans on 9/11.
I think that's absolutely right, Chris. I mean, look, he's backing off from where he was. For all these years, he said that Saddam had something to do with 9/11. Now he's backing away from that. But he has this alibi, this cover of there's some sort of relationship there. And if you look at every single study that's been done, not just what George Tenet said, but a study by the Joint Forces Command that looked at captured Saddam documents, if you look at the Senate Intelligence Committee study, if you look at the 9/11 Commission report, they all say there was no significant collaborative operational relationship. So the rest of it is just dots in the air, basically.
And I just love it when he assumes that avuncular fashion, like Uncle Bill telling us the truth. You know, Uncle Dick, here's the truth, and it's not the truth. Here's Cheney again, recently posing as a CIA defender when he, in fact, had been pushing the CIA around every time he went over there, the half dozen times he went over to Langley, to push him around and get him to doctor their case for us to go to war. Here he is now claiming to be their best friend. This is just not the truth. And you can check with any reporter who's covered this story. Here he is claiming to be the best friend of the CIA.
At the CIA, our people are left to wonder if they can depend on the White House or Congress to back them up when the going gets tough. Why should an agency employee take on a difficult assignment when, even though they act lawfully and in good faith, years down the road, the press and Congress will treat everything they do with suspicion, outright hostility, and second guessing?
And here's what a really great reporter for the Washington Post wrote back when it mattered, back in 6503, after we get into that war that we were led into by Cheney. Vice President Cheney and his most senior aide, that's Scooter Libby, made multiple trips to the CIA over the past year to question analysts studying Iraq's weapons programs and alleged links to al-Qaeda. Catch it? Creating an environment in which some analysts felt they were being pressured to make their assessments fit with the Bush administration's policy objectives, according to senior intelligence officials. And so Jonathan, Cheney was pushing them around over there, getting them to try to conform to his ideological ambition to get us into war by claiming some connection between Saddam Hussein and what happened to us on the horror of 9/11. And now he's out there saying he's their best friend.
Well, look, there's 2 points. First of all, we know that when they were preparing Colin Powell's speech to the UN, Scooter Libby tried to push this nonsense about Mohammed Atta meeting with an Iraqi agent in Prague into Colin Powell's speech, and they refused to do it. But second of all, let's remember who started beating up on the CIA first. It was Donald Rumsfeld and Mr. Cheney.
Sure.
How did they do it? They were talking about how incompetent the CIA was, that they had failed to detect the Indian nuclear test, that they had failed to detect the North Korean missile test, and that it was their fault that they were unable to know the full extent of Saddam's nuclear weapons program before the first Gulf War. So let's talk who started demonizing the intelligence community first. It was Mr. Cheney and Mr. Rumsfeld.
Warren, I don't understand this guy, Cheney. Does he assume everybody else is a balloon head, some stupid person that they forget that he and Scooter Libby were at war with the CIA, that was the whole thing about the outing of Valerie Wilson, Valerie Plame? All that war was their attempt to get even with them at the CIA, that there was a war going on in the months after 9/11, after we went to war with Iraq? Do they expect everybody forgot that so Cheney can come out now and said we were on the same side of the CIA? They're the ones that outed the agent.
I think that's right. I mean, sort of a question of the big lie. And, you know, Cheney's argument is not with us. It's with the facts as we know them. But they keep repeating it often and often enough. They believe that maybe the American public will buy it. And the other part of this, Chris, I think, is that, you know, he's emerged or appointed himself as the true defender of the Bush administration's security legacy.
Yeah.
He's out there almost every week in an almost unprecedented fashion for a former vice president.
Scooter Libby lost his law license. He lost it. He's got 400,000 of community service hours to do. He's got a felony record now because they were going to war with the CIA. Does everybody forget this? Let's take a look at, here's Dick Cheney again here, talking about only a few bad apples being responsible for Abu Ghraib. He's still saying it.
There has been a strange and sometimes willful attempt to conflate what happened to Abu Ghraib with top-secret program of enhanced interrogations. At Abu Ghraib, a few sadistic prison guards abused inmates in violation of American law, military regulation, and simple decency. For the harm they did to Iraqi prisoners and to America's cause, they deserved and received Army justice. And it takes a deeply unfair cast of mind to equate the disgraces of Abu Ghraib with the lawful, skillful, and entirely honorable work of CIA personnel trained to deal with a few malevolent men.
Gentlemen, John McCain, Lindsey Graham joined a bipartisan report by the Senate Armed Services Committee that said the abuses of detainees in CIA U.S. custody cannot simply be attributed to the actions of a few bad apples. The fact is that senior officials and the U.S. government solicit information on how to use aggressive techniques, redefine the law to create the appearance of their legality, and authorize their use against detainees. The facts are there. It's bipartisan. And the vice president comes out again against the facts and says it was a few bad apples when it came from the top. It came from him. Warren?
You know, the senior officials include Donald Rumsfeld, who was Cheney's closest ally in the Bush administration.
And Cheney pushing all the time for more intel to prove a 9/11 connection to Saddam, right?
Exactly.
You guys are great. By the way, you ought to get a Pulitzer for this. Thank you, Jonathan Landy. Thank you very much, Warren Strobel. Congratulations to your boss at McClatchy for giving you the time to do some great journalism. Thank God we got some facts to go up with against Cheney's constant effort to revise history.